Hello friends, how are you? My name is Ari Theriger and today I'm going to talk about the left hand path. What exactly is it? The reason why I'm doing this is mostly because of Icelandic magical staves, because occasionally some of you ask me why some of the magical staves have to be carried on the left side of the body, or why in some rituals associated with some magical staves you need to draw blood from a body part on the left side, etc. And also, I've noticed some of my patrons have been interested in knowing about Tursathu, which is a neo-pagan left-hand path spirituality based on Old Norse myths. So there isn't a clear idea what exactly is the left-hand path, so I wanted to speak a bit about it, so people might have some notions. Because there are some misconceptions and things are not exactly how the majority of people think they are. The left-hand path begins as a classical way of dividing everything in two sides for practical reasons in urban planning. And then along the centuries it gained other connotations and remained something very much part of superstition. But I shall develop that further ahead. The point is, the left-hand path is seen as something evil and quite negative, but that's because people have the tendency to see everything in a dualistic perspective of good and evil. Left-hand path and right-hand path is a dualistic conception, but none of which needs to necessarily be entirely evil or good. Keep an open mind throughout this video and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. There is this tendency to see the right-hand path as a true spiritual path towards enlightenment, which isn't true. Left or right, the objective is the same: to reach greater wisdom, higher consciousness and subsequently illumination. Only the way you choose to reach such enlightenment is different. Left-hand paths and right-hand paths are two phrases to describe alternative religious movements and spiritualities dealing with the occult and the study of magic as means of reaching a higher spiritual state of existence. In a few words, the right-hand path is much more concerned with symbols that represent perspectives of goodness, concerned with the community, the well-being of the group meditation or individual meditation focused on spiritual reasons, often related to submission to a religious authority or to reach a spiritual state equal to a religious figure, with the objective to follow the footsteps of a particular spiritual role model. As such, it's much more concerned with the spiritual sphere rather than the physical and the materialistic reality. It's the abandonment of our reality in pursuit of a spiritual one, so it's a world-denying perspective. Whilst the left-hand path is much more individualistic, concerned with self-development, self-analysis and self-empowerment. The focus is on individualism and free thought, the development of one's own abilities, rejecting religious authority and social taboos. A path much more concerned with the material, the physical, experiencing the world and reach a higher state of consciousness through the ability of appreciating the pleasures of the world. So it's a path focused on the elevation and centrality of the self. It's a path with a world-accepting view. The right-hand path and the left-hand path are labels for two schools of magic, white magic and black magic, respectively. But, as I've said before, I personally do not believe in white or black magic. To me, there is only power we harness through sorcery, through our own skills and through our hard work and by focusing our mind into the subject. We are the ones to give a purpose to power, be that good or bad. However, theoretically speaking, we must label white, gray, and black in order to construct boundaries and categories to help distinguishing one thing from the other. But one cannot exist without the other. I've given this example before. How can you heal a disease if you don't understand the disease itself? If you don't know how to curse, how do you know how to heal it? White magic is the basis of sorcery or the black arts. It's quite simple, really, if you think in these terms. Every shadow is derived from brightness. Every shadow possesses the energy of the light. The objective is the same, to reach enlightenment, but the path you choose to do so is quite different. Some prefer to follow a brighter and lighter guidance, while others prefer to concentrate on the self, make their own path, solely trusting in their abilities and developing such abilities through self-sacrifice, free from the submission to a religious authority. But what are the origins of the concept of the left-hand path? Let's find out. Many religions and spiritualities nowadays, and the magical practices of each, are divided into right and left, white and black. Many religions have a dualistic worldview, but the concept of right and left, being good and evil respectively, is European, even though, for instance, Buddhism is considered a right-hand path. In many religions, there has always been this perspective of the duality of everything, one side being bad and the other being good. But the phrases right hand and left hand is a classical model brought into other religions. Buddhists don't see themselves as being on the right-hand path, and certainly witches of the old world didn't see themselves as or on the left-hand path. These are concepts of the Western world because we Europeans have the tendency to label everything because we need a certain organized mind structure to know which is which, so we don't get confused and avoid mistakes. Let me give you an example. The indigenous people of New Zealand see the right side related to life and the left side to death, the right side to the divine and the left side to demons. But this doesn't mean the right is good and the left is bad. They are just opposites that complement themselves, just like the Chinese philosophical concept of yin and yang, or pre-Christian Norse perspectives of order and chaos. The concept of the right side being good and the left side being bad is thanks to Europeans, mainly the Romans, who already had Etruscan influences and later on adopted Christianity and turned their own pagan perspectives of two sides that complement themselves into the duality of good and evil brought by religious beliefs of the Middle East. Let me explain. The Etruscans were not indigenous groups of the Italian peninsula. Their origins remain a mystery, but most likely they came somewhere from Asia Minor or the Arabian Peninsula even, or further east, because in their culture and religion there is a lot of Central Asian concepts and motifs, judging by their gods represented by animals and ferocious beasts. Their religion was a permanent conflict between the forces of good and evil. So it's not something common from prehistoric Europe. The Etruscans migrated to the Italian peninsula, later on received Hellenic influences, the anthropomorphization of their gods, etc. The indigenous peoples of the Italian peninsula adopted the Etruscan culture and religion in many ways. These indigenous groups of the Italian peninsula, who would later on make confederation and be known as Romans, adopted this Eastern perspective of good and evil. So everything became a dualistic perception of good and evil. The agrimensori or grammatici were the people who projected the parceling of the territory. When it came to divide a certain region into two sides, the one to build the city or whatever urban center, and the outside, the religious perspective of the Etruscans was applied. The right side was linked to good and the left side was linked to evil. I've made a draft which I would very much like to show you to explain this. While facing north, the agrimensori or the grammatici would divide the territory into two sides, the pars destra or the right side and the pars sinistra, the left side. This was a highly religious act using a plow to delimit the city limits. This line opened up with the plow was called vallum. The space within the limits was called the pomerium, the symbolic border of a Roman urban center. The interior was considered the place of the gods, hence the constructions of the temples of the most prominent gods within the city limits. It was the civilized space. The exterior was considered profane, the place of mysteries, the unknown, the wild, the uncivilized, hence the construction of the necropolis outside the city limits for practical reasons and to avoid health issues, but religious purposes as well, the place of the dead and the underworld, the dwelling places of the ancestors. This is the exact same Norse concept I've talked about on the video of the Hearth Cult, which I will leave a link down below in the description. As you can see, the English word sinister comes from the Latin word for the left, sinistra. To the Romans, the left side wasn't necessarily evil. This projection of a territory had a very rational explanation. Each structure had its own rightful place. For instance, you wouldn't mix the dead with the living to avoid health issues. But the religious Etruscan past remained and the Romans were very superstitious. So the connotations of the left side being evil remained. Superstition led the Romans to give a continuation to religious traditions, not because they believed in them, but because they were superstitious and might as well continue to do things as they have been done for centuries by their ancestors. The Latin word sinistra was related to the left side and also to evil, a very old Roman superstition. This relation with left and the reversal of the natural order of things remained in the occult and within the studies of magic. The left side was the place of mysteries and the unknown, the place of the underworld gods and the gods of nature and the wilds. The left side was chaos in contrast with the right side, the side of the city and the civilized space, the place of the gods, of order, justice, civil affairs, etc. The Latin word auspicium, or the person related to that auspex, was someone who was capable of divination through the observance of the flight of birds. The way they flew was the manifestation of the divine. If they flew right, it was a good omen. If they flew left, it was a bad omen. This was just an example. This dualistic Etruscan perspective was kept in the classic world in the form of superstition. As the Roman Empire spread, so did this superstition. An eternal fight of good and evil already existed in many religions. Zoroastrianism, for instance, one of the most ancient monotheistic religions, already had this perception of an eternal fight between the forces of good and evil. The perspective of the existence of the left side and right side as two opposites that complement themselves is far older. But the junction of these two perceptions creating the right side of good and the left side of evil we have to give thanks to the Romans. This superstition was kept in occultism and the magical arts of the Western world, precisely because the great majority of modern and contemporary magical practices and the occult is greatly based on the magical practices of the classical world. Even the English word left comes from the Anglo-Saxon lithi, which designates something weak and useless. So this perception of the left side being something evil remained very much rooted in the European consciousness. The right-hand path has been associated with all things good and pure, while the left-hand path is associated with the unholy and evil, always giving a sense of inferiority, mediocrity and weakness. Even within neo-paganism, in Wicca for instance, which is considered a right-hand path, there is this permanent warning against using dark magic, claiming that the person who uses black magic have their magic come back to them threefold. This moral guidance is inexistent in the left-hand path. It's due to the classical world that we get this negativity of the left-hand path, greatly spread later on by Christianity and such Middle Eastern religions and religious concepts based on the dualistic view of good and evil. In medieval Europe, the usage of the left hand was considered witchcraft. Catholic schools used to punish those who dare use the left hand to write. Even my grandmother and my aunt suffered that stigma in school and were beaten many times until they learned how to use the right hand, because using the left was worshipping Satan. The left-hand path is as plausible as the right-hand path, only the choices are much different. Within the left-hand path, the self is the center of consciousness and not a divine entity or entities through whom we reach enlightenment. The right-hand paths deny practices concerning the self in exchange for associations with a higher power for the benefit of the community, which often leads into the creation of a single perspective all must follow to achieve spiritual reward. The left-hand paths are generally for the good of the self, reaching a greater state of consciousness and enlightenment by educating our own ability to think for ourselves and choose not to follow religious authority or a specific religious role model. We have to take in mind that the formulation of the powers of evil as independent entities of the divine is conducted in a dualistic universe in which evil and good are in constant struggle. This perception is mainly adopted by Western Asian cultures. Zoroastrianism is one of the most ancient monotheistic religions centered in dualistic cosmology of good and evil. Zoroastrianism has its roots in Indo-Iranian religious systems, and there is a great chance it influenced Etruscans who migrated to the Italian peninsula and brought this dualistic perspective of good and evil. Zoroastrianism certainly influenced Judaism, and subsequently Christianity and Islam, which are religions with a great impact in the Western culture. If you are a pagan, there is no reason to believe in this perception of good and evil as opposites in an eternal fight. With this being said, it makes no sense within the pagan communities to continue to reinforce that the left-hand path is bad and the right is good. Paganism isn't about worshipping many gods and a fight of good versus evil. Paganism is about world-accepting views and perspectives of opposites that complement themselves. Which is why many pagans increasingly choose the left-hand path. It's not an evil path, it's just another path that focuses on the individual and free thinking, away from certain general ideas that prevent the mind from evolving. Because seeking out knowledge by ourselves and developing our ability to experience the world around us is plausible and healthy. Why should we adopt a simplified view of the world such as this, of good and evil, right and left, light and darkness, white and black? This is inaccurate. The world isn't as simple as this. What can be good to some, it's bad for others. The good ends when it starts to cause negativity to others outside our own reality and perceptions. Order isn't good or evil. Chaos isn't good or evil. They are realities necessary for the continuation of existence. Fire destroys, but the ashes fertilize the ground. Rain gives water and life to the world, but too much creates floods and kills. If we continue to absorb this dualistic perception of good and evil, we will never truly understand the world and ourselves. The good doesn't wash away the bad, and the bad doesn't wash away the good. There is nothing in the world and in the universe that is purely evil or purely good. Left and right, they are different and complement themselves, just as order needs chaos and vice versa. The darker and chaotic aspects of life, nature, and the universe must be encountered and accepted, not evaded and denied. By knowing the dark side of wisdom, the self is refined. Whatever path you choose, in the end, it doesn't matter. You are not taking the side of good or the side of evil. You are just taking a side and trying to understand that everything has opposites, and they aren't evil or good, they just are. There is a balance in all things, not an eternal fight. Whatever path you choose, or whatever magical art you wish to get your hands on to enhance your own abilities and seek a higher understanding and illumination, keep in mind that you already possess 3 very useful abilities that will help you to evolve in whatever paths you walk through life. Senses, logic, and communication. Develop these abilities first and keep on developing them, and then proceed. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, don't forget to go.